What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actresses decides she's had enough of a talk show host's games and fights back with everything she's got? You're about to witness one of the most shocking confrontations in late-night television. History where an interview goes so wrong that it leaves everyone speechless. Before we dive into this absolutely explosive moment that had the entire entertainment industry talking, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because what you're about to see will change how you look at celebrity interviews forever. The studio lights cast their familiar warm glow as Jimmy Kimmel shuffled through his note cards, preparing for what he thought would be another easy interview with a Hollywood legend. Meryl Streep, the three-time Academy Award winner and undisputed queen of American cinema, was scheduled to appear to promote her latest film. What Kimmel didn't realize was that Streep had been watching his show for months, growing increasingly disgusted with his treatment of guests and his apparent need to humiliate people for cheap laughs. Streep had arrived at the studio that evening with more than just promotional talking points. She'd come armed with decades of experience reading people, understanding their motivations, and most importantly, she'd come with absolutely nothing left to lose. At 74 years old and with a career that had already cemented her place in film history, she was no longer willing to play the Hollywood game of polite smiles and manufactured charm when faced with what she considered to be genuine cruelty disguised as entertainment. As she walked onto the stage, the audience erupted, in the kind of genuine applause reserved for true legends. Streep waved graciously, her smile warm and authentic, giving no hint of what was brewing beneath the surface. Kimmel stood up from behind his desk, that practiced grin plastered across his face as he extended his hand in greeting. Meryl Streep. "Everybody," Kimmel announced to the audience, his voice carrying that fake enthusiasm that had become his trademark. "The incomparable, the legendary, the woman who makes every other actor in Hollywood feel inadequate just by existing." Streep shook his hand, her grip firm and steady, her eyes studying his face with the intensity of someone who had spent a lifetime reading characters and understanding their motivations. "Thank you for having me, Jimmy. Though I have to say, after watching your show recently, I'm curious to see which version of you shows up tonight." The comment caught Kimmel off guard, but he quickly recovered with a nervous chuckle. "Oh, you get the same charming, devastatingly handsome version every time. That's what you pay for with premium late-night television." As they took their seats, Streep settled into her chair with the poise of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. She crossed her legs elegantly and folded her hands in her lap, but there was something in her posture that suggested she was ready for battle. "So, Meryl," Kimmel began, consulting his cards, "you've got a new movie coming out, and I have to ask, at this stage in your career, what keeps you motivated? I mean, you've already won everything there is to win. Are you just trying to show off at this point?" The question was designed to be playfully provocative, the kind of gentle ribbing that usually got a laugh from both guest and audience. But Streep didn't laugh. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying Kimmel with the same intensity she brought to her most challenging roles. "Show off?" she repeated, her voice carrying just a hint of steel beneath the velvet. "That's an interesting way to frame dedication to one's craft. Tell me, Jimmy, when you wake up every morning and decide to make jokes about people's personal tragedies and mock their appearances for laughs, would you say you're showing off, or are you just doing what you think you need to do to get ratings?" The studio fell silent. This wasn't the kind of banter audiences were used to hearing from celebrity guests, especially not from someone as universally beloved as Meryl Streep. Kimmel's smile flickered, but he pressed on, thinking he could steer the conversation back to safer territory. "Well, I like to think I'm bringing joy to people's lives," he said, his voice taking on a slightly defensive tone. "Comedy is important. It helps people laugh at the absurdities of life, right? Even you've done comedy. You were hilarious in Mamma Mia." Streep's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. There's a difference between making people laugh with you and making them laugh at someone else's expense. There's a difference between finding humor in life's absurdities and creating absurdities for the purpose of humiliating people. Surely someone in your position understands that distinction. Kimmel was starting to realize that this interview wasn't going according to plan. He'd expected the usual promotional routine, some light banter, maybe a funny anecdote or two. Instead, he was facing someone who seemed determined to have a very different kind of conversation. "I think you might be taking things a little too seriously," he said, attempting to dismiss her concerns with a wave of his hand. "It's just entertainment. People understand that. They know it's all in good fun." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and it was exactly what Streep had been waiting for. She leaned forward slightly, her voice remaining perfectly calm, but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Just entertainment," she repeated. "Jimmy, I've been in this business for over 50 years. I've seen what just entertainment can do to people. I've watched careers destroyed, relationships ruined, and lives derailed because someone decided that another person's pain was worth a few laughs. So when you sit there and tell me it's just entertainment, I have to wonder if you actually believe that, or if it's just easier than acknowledging the real impact of what you do." The audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Kimmel's usual confidence was beginning to crack as he realized he was facing someone who wasn't going to play by the usual rules of celebrity interviews. "Look, Meryl," he said, his voice taking on a slightly irritated edge, "I think you're really overanalyzing this. People come on this show because they want to have fun, they want to promote their projects, and they want to connect with the audience. Nobody's forcing anyone to be here." Streep's laugh was soft but carried no warmth whatsoever. "Nobody's forcing anyone to be here? Jimmy, do you know how this industry works? Do you understand the pressure that actors, especially young actors, face to appear on shows like this? Do you think people really have a choice when their publicists and agents and studio executives tell them they need to do publicity, that they need to be good sports and laugh along with whatever jokes you want to make at their expense?" She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Or maybe you do know exactly how it works, and that's what makes it even worse. Maybe you know that people feel like they can't say no, that they can't push back, that they have to sit, hear and smile while you mock them, and maybe that's exactly why you feel so comfortable doing it." Kimmel's face was beginning to flush red. This was his show, his territory, and he wasn't used to being challenged so directly, especially not by someone who was supposed to be promoting a movie. He decided to push back. "I think you're being pretty unfair here, Meryl. I've always been respectful to my guests. I think if you look at my track record, you'll see that I treat people well. Maybe you're just having a bad day or something." The suggestion that she was simply having a bad day was the spark that ignited something much more dangerous. Streep's eyes narrowed slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of decades of experience and accumulated wisdom. Streep's eyes narrowed slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of decades of experience and accumulated wisdom. "A bad day?" she repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more power than any shout. "Jimmy, let me tell you about having a bad day. A bad day is when you're a young actress trying to build a career, and you come on a show like this thinking you're going to have a professional conversation about your work, only to discover that the host has prepared a series of questions designed to embarrass you in front of millions of people." She shifted in her seat, her posture straightening as she prepared to deliver what felt like a closing argument in a trial. A bad day is when you realize that someone with a platform that reaches millions of Americans has decided that your personal struggles, your professional challenges, your human vulnerabilities are nothing more than material for cheap laughs. A bad day is when you understand that the person sitting across from you doesn't see you as a human being with feelings and dignity, but as content to be consumed and discarded. Kimmel tried to interrupt, But Streep held up a hand that somehow commanded absolute silence. But you know what's worse than having a bad day? It's realizing that the person causing those bad days for other people thinks he's the victim when someone finally calls him out on it. It's watching someone who makes millions of dollars by humiliating others play the wounded party when faced with even the mildest criticism. The studio audience was riveted, watching one of America's most beloved actresses systematically dismantle one of their favorite talk show hosts. Kimmel's face had gone from red to pale, and his hands were gripping the edge of his desk. "Meryl, I think you're really mischaracterizing what I do here," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I make people laugh. I bring joy into their lives. I help them forget about their problems for a little while. That's not a bad thing." Streep's response was immediate and devastating. "You make people laugh at other people's expense. You bring joy to some people by causing pain to others. You help your audience forget about their problems by creating problems for your guests. And the fact that you can't see the difference between those things tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." She leaned back in her chair, her voice taking on the cadence of someone delivering a masterclass in human psychology. "Jimmy, I've spent my entire career studying human behavior, understanding what motivates people, what drives them, what breaks them. And I can tell you that what you do on this show isn't comedy. It's something much darker. It's the need to elevate yourself by diminishing others. It's the desire to feel powerful by making other people feel small. It's the kind of behavior that, in any other context, we would call bullying." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Kimmel's breathing had become noticeably shallow, and sweat was beginning to form on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. "That's not fair," he said, his voice rising with desperation. "I'm not a bully. I'm a comedian. There's a difference. Comedy has always pushed boundaries, has always made people uncomfortable sometimes. That's what makes it funny." Streep's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Comedy has always pushed boundaries? Jimmy, let me share something with you. I've worked with some of the greatest comedic minds in history. I've been directed by people who understood that the highest form of comedy comes from truth, from insight, from finding the universal human experiences that we can all recognize and laugh about together. That's comedy. What you do is something else entirely." She paused, studying his face with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. "What you do is find people's weaknesses, their insecurities, their vulnerabilities, and you exploit them for entertainment. You take someone's pain and turn it into your profit. You take someone's embarrassment and turn it into your success. And then you hide behind the excuse that it's just comedy, as if calling something comedy somehow makes it morally acceptable." Kimmel was losing control of the situation completely. This was supposed to be his domain, his show, his rules, but somehow this 74-year-old actress had turned his own studio into a courtroom where he was the defendant. "You don't understand the pressures I'm under," he said, his voice cracking. "You don't understand what it's like to have to come up with fresh material every single night, to keep millions of people entertained, to compete with other shows and other hosts. It's not as easy as you think it is." The moment the words left his mouth, Kimmel knew he'd made a terrible mistake. Streep's eyes lit up with something that looked almost like predatory satisfaction. "I don't understand pressure," she said, her voice dripping with incredulity. "Jimmy, I've been performing for over 50 years. I've been in situations where one wrong word, one missed cue, one moment of imperfection could end my career. I've had to memorize thousands of pages of dialogue, embody dozens of different characters, and do it all while cameras rolled and millions of people watched and judged every single choice I made." She stood up from her chair and suddenly the entire dynamic of the interview shifted. Now she was looking down at him, and he seemed to shrink in his seat. "But you know what I never did? I never decided that my pressure, my stress, my need to succeed gave me the right to hurt other people. I never decided that my career was more important than someone else's dignity. I never decided that my entertainment value was worth more than another human being's self-respect." Kimmel was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The audience was completely silent, watching this masterclass in moral authority being delivered by one of the greatest actresses of all time. And that's the difference between us, Jimmy. When I'm under pressure, I look for ways to rise to the occasion, to dig deeper into my craft, to find something true and meaningful to offer. When you're under pressure, you look for someone weaker than you to tear down so you can feel better about yourself. She began walking toward him, not in a threatening way, but with the measured steps of someone who had complete control of the situation. "Do you want to know what I think your real problem is? I think you're terrified that without other people's pain to feed off of, without other people's embarrassment to hide behind, people might actually see who you really are. And I think you're right to be terrified, because what we're seeing right now, this defensiveness, this inability to take responsibility for your actions, this desperate need to make yourself the victim, this is who you really are when you can't hide behind your writers and your rehearsed material." Kimmel finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate plea rather than the confident comeback he was hoping for. "Stop," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just stop. This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't how interviews are supposed to go. You're supposed to be here to promote your movie, not to attack me personally." Streep paused, tilting her head as if considering his words. When she spoke again, her voice was softer but somehow more devastating than anything she'd said before. "This isn't how interviews are supposed to go. Jimmy, how many of your guests have sat in this chair and thought the exact same thing? How many people have come here expecting a professional conversation about their work, only to find themselves subjected to personal attacks and humiliation? How many people have wanted to say exactly what I'm saying right now but couldn't, because they were afraid of what it might cost them?" Streep's question hung in the air like an indictment, and Kimmel's face crumpled as the weight of her words hit him. He looked out at his audience, searching for the support and validation he was used to receiving, but found only shocked faces, staring back at him. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm just trying to do my job. I'm just trying to make people laugh." For a brief moment, something that might have been compassion flickered across Streep's face, but it was quickly replaced by something much harder. "Jimmy, the fact that you never meant to hurt anyone might be the most damning thing you could say right now. It means you've been hurting people without even thinking about it. It means you've been so focused on your own success, your own career, your own need to be liked and admired, that you never stopped to consider the human cost of your entertainment." She moved closer to his desk, her presence now completely dominating the studio. "Do you know what makes a great actor? It's empathy. It's the ability to understand and feel what other people are experiencing. It's the capacity to see the world through someone else's eyes and to care about their pain as much as you care about your own. And looking at you right now, listening to everything you've said tonight, I don't think you have the faintest idea what that feels like." Kimmel's composure finally shattered completely. Tears began streaming down his face as he looked up at this woman who had just systematically destroyed everything he thought he knew about himself. "What do you want from me?" he sobbed. "What am I supposed to do? This is who I am. This is what I do. I can't just change everything because you don't like it." Streep's response was immediate and merciless. "Can't change? Jimmy, I've been watching you for the past 20 minutes, and you've already changed. The mask has come off. The pretense has fallen away. For the first time since I walked onto this stage, I'm seeing the real you. And you know what? The real you is terrified, insecure, and desperate for approval. The real you knows exactly what you've been doing to people, and you hate yourself for it." She paused, letting him absorb her words before delivering the final blow. "The question isn't whether you can change. The question is whether you want to change. Because right now, you have a choice. You can continue being the person who hurts others to make himself feel better, or you can become someone who uses his platform to lift people up instead of tearing them down. But you have to decide right now, in front of all these people, who you want to be. Kimmel looked up at her through his tears, his face a mask of anguish and confusion. "I don't know how," he whispered. For the first time since the interview began, Streep's expression softened slightly. "You start by admitting what you've done. You start by acknowledging that you've hurt people and taking responsibility for it. You start by apologizing, not just with words, but with actions. You start by using your platform to make amends instead of making excuses." The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Everyone present seemed to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. A moment of genuine human reckoning happening in real time on national television. But instead of taking the lifeline Streep had offered him, Kimmel's humiliation suddenly transformed into rage. His tears stopped flowing, his face hardened, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with venom. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he snarled, standing up behind his desk. "You come on my show, you attack me personally, you make me look like a monster in front of my own audience, and then you have the audacity to tell me how to live my life? You're just an actress. You pretend to be other people for a living. You don't know anything about the real world." The attack was so vicious, so completely at odds with the vulnerability he'd shown just moments before, that several audience members audibly gasped. But Streep didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, a cold expression that somehow conveyed both pity and disgust. "There it is," she said quietly. "There's the real Jimmy Kimmel. Not the crying, apologetic version, not the confused, lost version, but the angry, vindictive version that comes out when someone threatens your carefully constructed image." She began walking back toward her chair, but stopped and turned to address the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed is what psychologists call a narcissistic collapse. It's what happens when someone whose entire sense of self is built on the approval and admiration of others suddenly finds themselves exposed and criticized. First comes the denial, then the self-pity, then the false vulnerability, and finally, when none of those tactics work, comes the rage." She gestured toward Kimmel, who was still standing behind his desk, his hands clenched into fists. "This is the man you've been inviting into your homes every night. This is the person you've been trusting to entertain you, to inform you, to help. You make sense of the world, and now you've seen what happens when that person is faced with even the slightest challenge to his authority, the smallest threat to his ego." Kimmel exploded with indignation. "Get out!" he screamed, pointing toward the exit. "Get out of my studio right now! Security! Security! I want this woman removed from the building immediately!" The outburst was so extreme, so obviously disproportionate to anything that had actually happened, that even his own production team seemed hesitant to respond. Security guards appeared at the edges of the stage, but they looked confused and uncertain about what they were supposed to do. Streep looked at them calmly and then back at Kimmel. "It's all right," she said, her voice carrying easily throughout the silent studio. "I'll leave on my own. I've said what I came here to say." She gathered her purse and stood up with the same dignity she'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation. "But before I go, I want to leave everyone here with something to think about. Tonight, you saw what happens when someone with power and influence is held accountable for their actions. You saw how quickly the mask comes off, how quickly the charm and humor disappears when the spotlight turns uncomfortable." She looked directly into the main camera. "And I want you to ask yourselves this question. If this is how this man reacts when one person, one guest, one actress challenges him on his own show, what does that tell you about his character? What does that tell you about his integrity? What does that tell you about whether you can trust him to tell you the truth about anything else?" She began walking toward the exit, her heels clicking against the studio floor in the profound silence. The entertainment industry has a responsibility to do better than this. We have a responsibility to create content that uplifts rather than degrades, that brings out the best in people rather than the worst. And audiences have a responsibility to demand better, to stop supporting content that profits from human suffering and humiliation. As she reached the studio doors, she turned back one final time. "Good night, everyone." "And Jimmy," she said, looking directly at the still seething host, "I genuinely hope you find a way to become the person you pretended to be tonight when you were crying and asking for help. Because that person, that vulnerable, honest person, that's someone worth saving. This person," she gestured at his current state, "is not." The doors closed behind her with a soft click, leaving behind a studio full of people who would never forget what they had just witnessed. Kimmel stood alone behind his desk, his career in ruins, his reputation destroyed, and his true character exposed for the entire world to see. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of his complete and total humiliation, documenting the night that one of Hollywood's biggest stars decided she'd had enough and fought back with everything she had. So what do you think? Was Meryl Streep right to call out Kimmel like this, or did she go too far? Should celebrities use their platforms to hold media personalities accountable, or should they just play the game and promote their projects? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that show what happens when the gloves come off and the truth comes out.